He stood at the pinnacle of his world, a king in a glass tower, overlooking a city that bowed to his wealth. He had it all, a billion-dollar company, a name that commanded respect, and a beautiful wife carrying his first child. But in a single brutal moment, the gleam of ambition in his eyes turned to poison. He made a choice, trading his family for a bigger fortune, throwing his pregnant wife out into the cold, unforgiving night. He believed he was untouchable. He never imagined that her quiet, unassuming father was the one man on earth who could dismantle his entire empire with nothing more than a keyboard and a lifetime of silent promises. This is the story of how a titan of industry was brought to his knees not by a rival, but by a father's love, and forced to bow before the family he tried to destroy. Ethan Blackwood loved the view from his penthouse. It was a conqueror's view. From the 63rd floor, the city of Seattle sprawled below a tapestry of glittering lights and crawling traffic. Every pinprick of light representing a life he had in some small way surpassed. His company, Blackwood Capital, was a leviathan in the world of high-frequency trading, a machine of his own design that devoured market inefficiencies and spat out obscene profits. At 34, he was the self-made king of a digital empire, and his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass was that of a man who had never known failure. His wife, Clara, was the perfect complement to his steel-edged ambition. She was the soft grace to his hard angles, an artist whose gentle spirit seemed to soothe the frantic, predatory energy that always thrummed just beneath his skin. They had met 3 years prior at a charity gala. He was there to network a shark in a tuxedo, and she was there because her latest painting had been donated for the auction. He'd been captivated not by her beauty alone, but by her utter lack of artifice. She didn't know who he was, and when he told her, she wasn't impressed by the money, but curious about the mind that built the machine. Their life was a meticulously curated dream. Dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, spontaneous trips to Paris on the private jet, a home filled with priceless art and minimalist furniture. Yet for Clara, the penthouse sometimes felt less like a home and more like a beautiful, sterile museum. Ethan was often distant, his mind 1,000 miles away, lost in the cascading numbers and algorithms that were his true passion. She loved him deeply, but she loved the man she saw in rare, unguarded moments, the one who would watch old movies with her, his head in her lap, or the one who truly listened as she described the colors of a sunset. The news of her pregnancy was supposed to be the final, perfect piece of their life. When she told him, placing his hand on her still, flat stomach, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes she couldn't decipher. It wasn't the pure, unadulterated joy she had expected. It was more complex, like a master strategist recalculating variables on a battlefield. "A son?" He'd said, his voice a low hum. "A Blackwood heir, to carry on the name." It wasn't "our baby" or "I'm so happy." It was about legacy, about an asset. The coldness of it was a tiny splinter in her heart, one she tried desperately to ignore. The distance between them grew in the following months. Ethan was working on the biggest deal of his career, a hostile takeover of Sterling Industries, a much older, more established tech firm, run by the formidable Harrison Sterling. It was a brutal, bloody corporate war, and Ethan was consumed by it. He came home later, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity, the scent of coffee and ozone clinging to his clothes. Clara, now 4 months pregnant and starting to show, tried to be the supportive wife. She made sure his favorite single malt was waiting. She ran him baths, She tried to talk to him about names for the baby, about turning one of the spare rooms into a nursery. "Not now, Clara." He'd snap his gaze, fixed on the multiple monitors in his home office. "This sterling deal is everything. Do you have any idea what this means?" She didn't, not really. She just knew it was taking her husband from her. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday in October. Ethan came home early, which was unusual. He didn't look tired. He looked energized, electric. There was a cruel, triumphant smirk on his face she hadn't seen before. "I did it," he announced, shrugging off his $1,000 coat and tossing it onto a chair. "I broke him. Harrison Sterling is finished." "Ethan, that's good," she said, confused by his tone. "It's better than good. It's magnificent," he said, pouring himself a drink. He turned to her, and his eyes were cold, assessing. "Clara, we need to talk." The splinter in her heart twisted. "Okay," she said, her hand instinctively going to her belly. He took a long swallow of his drink before speaking. "The terms of the final acquisition are delicate. Harrison is a proud man. To make this work, to merge our companies and create a true global powerhouse, certain alliances must be made." "Alliances? What do you mean?" He walked over to the window, his back to her. "Harrison has a daughter, Isabella Sterling. She's brilliant, ruthless. She's been running their European division. She's a partner, in the truest sense of the word." A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into Clara's veins. "Ethan, what are you saying?" He turned around, and any trace of the man she loved was gone. In his place was a stranger, a predator, who had just closed in on his prey. "The deal is contingent on a merger of families as well as companies. A marriage between me and Isabella. It solidifies the empire. It's the final move on the chessboard." The world tilted. The crystal glass of water in her hand slipped and shattered on the polished marble floor. A marriage, Ethan, you're married to me. We're having a baby." Her voice was a choked whisper. "That," he said, gesturing dismissively at her stomach, "is a complication, an unfortunate variable." The cruelty of his words was like a physical blow. "A complication. This is your child. It's a problem I can solve with money," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I will set you up, you and the child. You'll have an apartment, a generous trust fund. You'll want for nothing. You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement, of course. To everyone, our marriage simply didn't work out. Amicable split." Tears were streaming down her face, now hot and furious. "You think you can buy your child? You think you can just erase us because we're no longer convenient for your business deal? Who are you?" "I am the man who is offering you a comfortable life," he said, his patience thinning. "This is a much better deal than you'd get from any divorce court. I'm being generous." "Generous?" she shrieked, the sound raw and broken. "You're a monster." His face hardened into a mask of pure, chilling indifference. "I am a realist. This is the world I operate in. Love, sentiment. They are luxuries, Clara. Liabilities. I am building an empire, and an empire requires sacrifice. Isabella understands that. You, with your paintings and your feelings, you were a pleasant diversion. But the game has changed." He walked to the bedroom and came back with her suitcase, the one she used for weekend trips. He opened it on the floor. "Pack your things," he said. "The doorman will call you a car. I want you out of here tonight." She stared at him, at the suitcase, at the shattered pieces of glass and the shattered pieces of her life on the floor. "Ethan, please," she begged, one last desperate appeal. "Don't do this. Think about our baby." He looked at her. truly looked at her, and for a second she thought she saw a flicker of doubt. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by an iron resolve. "The deal with Sterling closes in a month. Isabella is already flying in." "You need to be gone," he stated, as if discussing a line item on a balance sheet. "The choice is simple, Clara. Leave with the money and your dignity, or be thrown out with nothing. But either way, you are leaving." The love she had for him curdled into something bitter and cold. The man she had married was a ghost, a fiction she had created in her own mind. This man, this creature of pure, unadulterated greed, was the reality. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she stopped crying. She squared her shoulders and looked him dead in the eye. "I don't want your money, Ethan. I don't want anything from you." She turned, walked into the bedroom, and packed not her expensive clothes or jewelry, but the few things that truly mattered: a photo of her parents, a book of poetry her mother had given her, and the first ultrasound picture of their baby. When she came back out, he was on his phone already talking business, his voice sharp and commanding. He didn't even look up as she walked past him, her suitcase rolling softly on the marble floor. As she waited for the elevator, the cold reality hit her. She was 4 months pregnant, homeless, and her life had just been liquidated like a failing stock. And the man she once promised to love for eternity hadn't even had the decency to say goodbye. The taxi ride felt like a descent into a different reality. The gleaming skyscrapers of downtown Seattle, once symbols of a shared future, now seemed to mock her, their lights cold and alien. Each drop of rain that slid down the window was a tear for the life that had just been so clinically excised. The driver, a kind-faced man named George, kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed with concern. He had asked, "Where to, ma'am?" And all she could whisper was an address in Bainbridge Island, an address she hadn't called home in years. The ferry ride across Puget Sound was a blur of mist and sorrow. Clara stood on the deck, the cold, salty wind whipping at her face, pulling her coat tighter around her pregnant belly. It was as if she was crossing a Stygian river, leaving the land of the living, or at least the world of Ethan Blackwood, behind. She was heading home. Her parents, Robert and Mary Thompson, lived in a modest, cedar-shingled house nestled amongst pine trees overlooking the water. It was the house she grew up in, a place of warmth, worn wooden floors, and the constant smell of her mother's baking, and the faint, clean scent of her father's workshop. When the taxi pulled up the gravel driveway, the porch light was already on, casting a warm, welcoming glow. Her mother Mary must have been watching from the window. The front door flew open before Clara had even paid the driver. Mary Thompson was a woman whose kindness was etched into the lines around her eyes. She took one look at her daughter's pale, tear-streaked face and the single suitcase, and her expression shifted from confusion to a fierce, maternal understanding. "Oh, my baby," she whispered, wrapping Clara in a hug that smelled of cinnamon and home. Clara collapsed into her mother's arms, the carefully constructed dam of her composure finally breaking, and she sobbed long and raggedly. Inside her father, Robert Thompson, was standing by the fireplace. He was a tall, quiet man, a retired software architect whose gentle demeanor belied a mind of formidable intellect. He was a man of few words, but his presence was a bedrock. He took her suitcase from her hand, his large, calloused hand briefly squeezing hers. It was all the comfort he needed to offer. She knew he was there. Over hot tea and toast that Clara couldn't eat, she told them everything. The words tumbled out in a broken, agonizing stream, The sterling deal, Isabella. The cold, transactional way Ethan had dismissed her and their unborn child. She spoke of the ultimatum, the suitcase, the utter finality in his eyes. Mary listened, her face a mask of grief and fury, tears welling in her own eyes. Robert, however, was unnervingly still. He sat in his old leather armchair, his hands steepled under his chin, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the hearth. He didn't interrupt. He didn't flinch. He just listened, absorbing every single painful detail. The silence from him was more profound than any shout could have been. When Clara finished, her voice raw and hoarse, Mary was the first to speak. That monster. I will call a lawyer first thing in the morning. We will fight him. He will not get away with this. Clara shook her head, feeling utterly defeated. What's the point, Mum? He has a team of the best lawyers in the country. He'll bury us in legal fees. He said he would. He'll paint me as a gold digger and drag my name through the mud. I can't. Robert finally moved. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and his eyes, when they met Clara's, were not filled with pity but with a calm, analytical fire. Did he threaten you? He asked, his voice low and even. Not physically, Clara said. He just made it clear. I was an obstacle to be removed, that I should take the money and disappear quietly for my own good. And you have this in writing, any emails, texts? No, she whispered. He was too smart for that. It was all in person, in our home. Robert nodded slowly, his mind clearly working, processing the information like lines of code. He looked at her belly, then back at her face. You are safe here, he said. It wasn't a platitude. It was a statement of absolute fact. You and your child will have everything you need. This is your home. You will not worry about money. You will not worry about Ethan Blackwood. Later that night, tucked into her childhood bed, the familiar scent of lavender from her mother's garden drifting through the window, Clara felt a fragile sense of safety. But beneath it, a current of fear still ran deep. Ethan wasn't just a man. He was a force of nature in his world. He crushed his enemies. What was to stop him from crushing her just to be thorough? She drifted into a troubled sleep and woke hours later thirsty. As she padded down the hallway, she saw a light on in her father's study. The door was slightly ajar. Peeking in, she saw him sitting in front of a complex multi-monitor computer setup, a system far more advanced than anything a typical retiree would own. The screen was filled with flowing lines of code market data streams and complex network architecture diagrams. He wasn't looking at family photos or reading the news. He was working. His fingers moved across the keyboard with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. On one screen, she saw the corporate structure of Blackwood Capital. On another, a deep-dive analysis of its core trading algorithms. Clara had always known her father was brilliant. In the 90s, he had been a legendary, albeit reclusive figure in the nascent world of fintech. He'd designed some of the foundational security protocols and trading architectures that the modern financial system was built upon, then abruptly retired in his late 40s, claiming he wanted a simpler life, away from the vultures of Wall Street. He'd cashed out his patents for a comfortable but not extravagant sum, and never looked back. Ethan had always dismissed him as Clara's quiet dad, the retired coat monkey. He had no idea who Robert Thompson really was. No one did, except a very small, very powerful circle of old-school tech pioneers. Watching him now, Clara understood. Her quiet, gentle father was not just looking at data. He was mapping out a battlefield. He was sharpening weapons she couldn't comprehend. The stillness she had seen earlier was not resignation. It was the deep, focused calm of a grand master contemplating a chessboard, seeing not just the next move, but the entire game 20 moves ahead. He wasn't going to call a lawyer. He was going to war. A strange sense of peace settled over Clara. The fear didn't vanish, but it was joined by something else, a sliver of awe. Ethan Blackwood had built his empire on code and algorithms. He had just made a mortal enemy of the man who had written the language. Ethan Blackwood felt invincible. With Clara gone, a sentimental weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The penthouse, once softened by her presence, was now exactly as he liked it, a pristine, silent monument to his success. There were no more gentle questions about his day, no more talk of nurseries or baby names. There was only the clean, exhilarating hum of ambition. Isabella Sterling arrived from London 2 days later. She was everything Clara was not. Where Clara was warm, Isabella was polished steel. She was sharp, impossibly chic, with an analytical mind that mirrored Ethan's own. They didn't speak of love. They spoke of synergy, of market share, of consolidating power. Their relationship was a merger, a strategic alliance, and the chemistry between them was born not of passion, but of a shared, ravenous hunger for dominance. "Your ex-wife," Isabella said on her first night in the penthouse, swirling a glass of vintage Bordeaux. "Was she a problem?" "She was at a loose end," Ethan replied, not looking up from a tablet displaying market projections. "I've tied it. No legal complications, no emotional attachments." "I made her a financial offer she couldn't refuse." He lied smoothly. "She's pragmatic. She took the money and is looking for a fresh start." He saw no need to tell Isabella about the pregnancy. It was an irrelevant data point, a variable he had already contained. To mention it would be to show weakness, a crack in his perfect, calculated facade. Their days became a whirlwind of meetings with lawyers, bankers, and PR firms. The merger of Blackwood Capital and Sterling Industries was being heralded in the financial press as the deal of the decade. Ethan Blackwood, the wunderkind of algorithmic trading, joins forces with the Sterling dynasty to create a new global tech titan, Sterling Blackwood. His face was on the cover of Forbes, his name spoken with reverence on cable news. He was no longer just rich. He was becoming a legacy. He completely forgot about Clara and her quiet father. They were a footnote from a previous chapter, irrelevant to the epic he was now writing. He'd had his assistant David wire a one-time severance of $500,000 to Clara's old bank account, an account he assumed she'd empty immediately. When the wire was returned a week later, marked refused, he felt a flicker of annoyance, not concern. "Stubborn," he muttered to David. "Fine, her loss. Let her see what it's like in the real world without my safety net." David Hayes, a young, fiercely intelligent analyst who had been with Ethan from the beginning, looked uneasy. "Sir, are you sure about this, I mean?" Her family is a retired programmer from some island," Ethan scoffed. "What are they going to do?" "Send me a strongly worded email. Focus on the Sterling integration." David, that's all that matters. But David, who had always admired Clara's kindness, felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. He had seen the returned wire transfer. It wasn't just a refusal. It was a statement. Meanwhile, on Bainbridge Island, Robert Thompson was not writing emails. He was activating a network not of lawyers, but of legends. His first call was to a man named Julian Ghost Vance, a cybersecurity savant living in a remote cabin in Utah. Julian owed his entire career to Robert, who had mentored him as a teenager and kept him out of federal prison. "Robert," Julian's voice crackled over the encrypted line. "It's been a decade. I thought you'd fallen off the earth." "I need a ghost in a machine, Julian," Robert said, his voice calm and steady. "A very specific machine. Blackwood Capital. Blackwood, the HFT Golden Boy. That place is a fortress. Their security architecture is top of the line." "I know," Robert said. "I designed the core principles it's based on 20 years ago, and I know the flaws I never bothered to publish." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, followed by a low whistle. "Oh, this is going to be fun. What do you need, old man? I don't want you to steal anything. I don't want you to break anything," Robert instructed. "I just want you to watch. I want to know every trade, every algorithm shift, every data packet that moves in and out of their servers. I want you to whisper in their wires." His next call was to an old colleague, a mathematics professor at MIT named Dr. Aris Thorne, a man who could see patterns in chaos that no one else could. "Aris," Robert said, "I'm sending you a data packet. It contains the trading philosophy of a certain firm. I need you to build a counter-rhythm, a model that doesn't defeat it but harmonizes with it in a way that introduces subtle discord." His third call was to a woman on the board of the largest pension fund in California, a woman he had tutored in quantitative analysis when she was just a struggling graduate student. He didn't ask for a favor. He simply advised her as an old friend to review the risk profile of her fund's exposure to newer aggressive HFT firms, particularly those with a single point of leadership. He was not gathering an army to lay siege to Ethan's castle. He was gathering termites, a quiet, invisible force that would chew away at the foundations until the entire gleaming structure was ready to collapse at the slightest push. He worked silently mostly at night while Clara slept, and Mary worried. He was a patient man, playing a very long game. He knew that to destroy a man like Ethan Blackwood, you didn't attack his money directly. You attacked his reputation, his genius, his very sanity. You made the machine he trusted above all else begin to lie to him. Back in Seattle, Ethan was celebrating. He and Isabella hosted a lavish party at the penthouse to announce their engagement and the finalization of the merger. The great and the good of the city were there, champagne flowed, and Ethan stood beside his new partner, feeling the immense intoxicating power of their combined influence. He raised a glass to the crowd. "To the future," he declared, his voice ringing with triumph. "To Sterling Blackwood, an empire built not on bricks and mortar, but on speed, intelligence, and a relentless vision." As the guests applauded, his phone buzzed. It was a priority alert from his head of operations. He glanced at it, a slight frown touching his lips. Subject: minor algorithmic drift, Alpha 7. Message seeing fractional percentage underperformance on the A7 algo. Probably market noise. Monitoring. Ethan dismissed it with a flick of his thumb. Market noise. An irrelevant data point. He put the phone back in his pocket and smiled at Isabella, oblivious to the fact that the first termite had just taken its first bite. The first week after the party, the minor algorithmic drift was just that, a whisper in the data streams. Ethan's lead quant, a jittery genius named Ben, assured him it was statistical noise. "The markets are volatile post-merger announcement, Ethan. It's just the system recalibrating. It'll smooth out." Ethan accepted the explanation. His Alpha 7 algorithm was his masterpiece, a complex piece of code that analyzed microsecond market fluctuations to execute thousands of trades per second. It had never failed him. The idea that it could be flawed was tantamount to questioning a law of physics. But the drift didn't smooth out. By the end of the second week, the fractional underperformance had become a consistent, albeit tiny, loss. It was like a slow leak in the engine of a Formula One car, not enough to stop it, but just enough to lose the race by a millisecond. In the world of high-frequency trading, a millisecond was an eternity. "Run a full diagnostic," Ethan commanded, his voice tight with irritation. "Strip the code down to its foundation and rebuild it. I want a report by morning." Ben and his team worked for 36 hours straight, fueled by caffeine and fear. The report landed on Ethan's desk with a thud. "We can't find anything," Ben said, his face pale, dark circles under his eyes. "The code is perfect. The hardware is running at peak efficiency. There are no bugs, no breaches, no intrusions. On paper, it should be performing 5% better than it is." "That's not possible," Ethan snapped, throwing the report onto his desk. "Machines don't lie. Find it." This was Robert Thompson's first move, executed by Dr. Aris Thorne. The counter-rhythm wasn't an attack. It was a subtle form of financial aikido. It introduced a series of infinitesimally small, perfectly legal trades into the market that mimicked the behavior of Alpha 7, but were designed to resolve a fraction of a microsecond earlier. It was like a shadow that arrived just before the person casting it. The result was that Alpha 7 was constantly arriving a moment too late, buying a fraction of a cent too high, selling a fraction too low. The losses were tiny on each trade, but multiplied by millions of trades a day, they began to add up. It was an elegant, undetectable drain on Blackwood Capital's lifeblood. Ethan grew obsessed. He started spending his nights in the office, staring at walls of cascading data, trying to spot the ghost in his machine. He became irritable and paranoid, his temper flaring at the slightest provocation. "Perhaps you're too close to it," Isabella suggested coolly one evening, as he ignored the gourmet meal she'd had catered. "You've been focused on this merger. Maybe you should let your team handle it." "My team can't see what I see," he retorted, his eyes never leaving the screen. "They're builders. I'm an architect. Something is wrong with the foundation." Then the second cut came. This one was executed by Julian "Ghost" Vance. Following Robert's instructions, Julian didn't hack the system. Instead, he exploited a long-forgotten backdoor in the server's firmware, a backdoor Robert himself had built 2 decades earlier for diagnostic purposes. He didn't steal data. He did something far more insidious. He slightly, almost imperceptibly, desynchronized the timestamps on a single random data server for a few nanoseconds every hour. The result was chaos masquerading as normalcy. A trade that was executed at 10:01 a.m. might be recorded as 10:04 a.m. To a human, it was meaningless. To a high-frequency trading algorithm that lived and died in the world of nanoseconds, it was catastrophic. It made the data untrustworthy. The system began to second-guess itself, creating micro-hesitations that led to missed opportunities. Ethan's profits, once a mighty river, were now a stream, and the stream was dwindling. He started lashing out, accusing his own people of incompetence or, worse, sabotage. "Someone in this room is leaking information," he roared during one tense board meeting, his eyes scanning the faces of his most trusted lieutenants. "Our strategies are being front-run. There is no other explanation." The paranoia began to infect the company culture. The collaborative energy that had fueled their rise was replaced by suspicion and fear. David Hayes watched his boss, the man he had once idolized, transform into a tyrant, haunted by a phantom he couldn't see. The third cut was the most subtle and perhaps the most brilliant. Robert, using a pseudonym, wrote a highly technical white paper titled Quantum Entanglement and Systemic Risk in Latency Arbitrage Models. It was a dense academic paper that he seeded onto obscure forums and university servers frequented by top-level quants and financial analysts. The paper didn't mention Blackwood Capital by name. It simply posited a theoretical vulnerability in the exact type of proprietary architecture Ethan used. It argued that such systems, in their relentless pursuit of speed, had created a structural fragility so profound that a minor, almost random external event, a solar flare, a specific sequence of market trades, could trigger a cascading failure. It was elegant, terrifying, and utterly plausible. The paper began to circulate, passed from one analyst to another like a forbidden text. It became a whisper on trading floors and in the research departments of major banks. Have you read the Quantum Entanglement paper? No one knew who wrote it, but its logic was impeccable. The woman on the pension fund's board, Robert's former student, read the paper. She saw the connection between the theoretical risk it described and the aggressive strategy of Blackwood Capital. At their next quarterly review meeting, she raised a concern. "I'm flagging Sterling Blackwood for a risk assessment," she announced. "Their performance has been erratic post-merger, and there is a theoretical framework suggesting their entire model could be a house of cards. I recommend we reduce our exposure until we have more clarity." The pension fund was one of Ethan's largest institutional investors. Their decision to publicly announce a risk assessment was not a withdrawal. It was a red flag, a signal to the entire market that something might be deeply wrong at the heart of Ethan Blackwood's empire. The whispers were becoming a conversation. The tiny cuts were beginning to bleed in earnest. Ethan, lost in his own fortress of code, was so busy looking for a single enemy soldier that he failed to realize the very ground beneath his feet was being systematically hollowed out. He felt the tremors, but he couldn't find the source of the earthquake. His confidence, once his greatest asset, was curdling into a fatal arrogance. He believed he was smarter than the market, smarter than any problem. He never once considered that the problem might be smarter than him. The pension fund's announcement was the first domino. In the fragile ecosystem of high finance, perception is reality. The news of a major risk assessment on Sterling Blackwood hit the financial wires like a shock wave. Ethan, who had always meticulously controlled his public image, was suddenly on the defensive. "It's a procedural review," he barked at a reporter from the Wall Street Journal who cornered him outside his office. "Our fundamentals are stronger than ever. This is nothing more than market jitters from our competitors who are terrified of our new scale." He projected confidence, but behind the scenes panic was beginning to set in. The jitters were real. Other institutional investors, spooked by the pension fund's move, and the circulating white paper, started making calls. They wanted reassurance. They wanted data. They wanted to know why his flagship algorithms were underperforming. Ethan and Isabella worked around the clock trying to calm their investors, but it was like trying to patch 100 leaks in a dam at once. For every investor they placated, 2 more would call, their voices laced with a new sharp edge of doubt. This was the moment Robert Thompson had been waiting for. The foundation was gone. It was time to push. From his quiet study on Bainbridge Island, he made one more call this time to a respected financial journalist he knew from his old life, a man who valued integrity above all else. "I'm sending you a package, Mark," Robert said. "No names, no sources, but the data inside is verified. It's a technical analysis of the trading architecture at a certain high-profile firm. It confirms with hard data the theoretical vulnerabilities outlined in a recent academic paper." The package was a masterwork of anonymous data dropping. It contained logs subtly altered by Julian to be untraceable yet accurate in their implication, showing the nanosecond timestamp discrepancies. It included a breakdown of Alpha 7's performance, highlighting the inexplicable and consistent losses. It was everything a journalist needed to connect the dots between the rumors and the reality. It didn't allege fraud or hacking. It alleged something far worse in the tech world: incompetence and fundamental design flaws. Mark's article, published under a dramatic headline, "Cracks in the Code is Sterling Blackwood's billion-dollar algo." A house of cards went viral. It was a match thrown on a field soaked in gasoline. The market opened the next day to a frenzy of selling. The stock price of Sterling Blackwood, which had soared after the merger announcement, began to plummet. It wasn't a dip, it was a cliff. Ethan stood on his trading floor, a modern-day Captain Ahab, on the deck of his sinking ship, watching the red numbers cascade down the screens. "Buy it back," he roared. "Initiate the share buyback program. Stabilize the price." They started pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into buying their own stock, trying to signal strength to the market. But it was like throwing buckets of water against a tsunami. The sell-off was too powerful, fueled by fear and the damning precision of the article. Then came the margin calls. Ethan had leveraged a significant portion of his personal and corporate assets to finance the hostile takeover of Sterling Industries. The banks that had loaned him the money had done so based on the valuation of his company. With the stock price in freefall, the value of his collateral was evaporating. The first call came from Deutsche Bank. "Mr. Blackwood, your loan-to-value ratio is breached. We need an immediate wire of $200 million to cover your position, or we will be forced to liquidate your holdings." Before he could even process it, another call came from JP Morgan. Then another from Goldman Sachs. The cascade had begun. They were demanding billions in collateral that he no longer had. In a desperate final gamble, Ethan turned to Harrison Sterling and Isabella. "We need an emergency infusion from the Sterling Family Trust," he said. His voice strained a sheen of sweat on his forehead. "Now, to cover the calls." Isabella looked at him, her face unreadable. She exchanged a glance with her father, who had been watching the meltdown from the corner office with a grim satisfaction. "No," Harrison Sterling said, his voice laced with ice. "This company is toxic. Your name is toxic. The Sterling family will not be throwing good money after bad." "What?" Ethan stammered, looking at Isabella. "Isabella, we're partners. We're getting married." She gave a small, cruel smile. "The engagement was a means to an end, Ethan. A requirement for a merger that was until yesterday advantageous. It is no longer advantageous. In fact, you've become a liability to my family's name. The engagement is off. We're invoking the reputational damage clause in the merger agreement to sever ties. The Sterling name will be removed from the company by the end of the day." The betrayal was so swift, so absolute, it knocked the air from his lungs. He had been a tool, a disposable asset. He had discarded Clara for this, for a woman who was a colder, more ruthless version of himself. The banks didn't wait. As the news of the Sterlings pulling out hit the wire, the liquidations began. Blocks of his stock were dumped onto the market, causing the price to crash into the pennies. The algorithms that had made him a billionaire were being sold off for scrap value to cover his debts. His art collection, his jet, his other properties, all seized and liquidated by creditors within hours. By the time the market closed, the empire of Ethan Blackwood was gone. Sterling Blackwood was a defunct entity, its assets carved up and sold off. His personal fortune had been wiped out. He wasn't just back to zero, he was hundreds of millions of dollars in debt. He stood alone in the dark, cavernous trading floor, the screens now black. The silence was deafening. Just 48 hours earlier, he had been the king of this world. Now he was a ghost haunting its ruins. He stumbled out of the building a dazed, broken man. He didn't even have the money for a taxi. He started walking aimlessly through the rain-slicked streets of the city he once owned. And for the first time in the cold, hollow emptiness of his spectacular failure, he thought of Clara. He thought of her warmth, her kindness, and the child she was carrying. His child. The one piece of his life that had been real, the one thing of true value. And he had thrown it away for a ghost. The weight of that realization was more crushing than the loss of any fortune. The next few days were a blur of humiliation for Ethan. His name, once a synonym for success, was now a punchline in the financial world, a cautionary tale of hubris. He was evicted from the penthouse, the locks changed by the bank that now owned it. He walked out with nothing but a single cardboard box containing a few clothes and personal effects. His friends, the ones who had flocked to his parties and slapped him on the back, no longer answered his calls. He was a pariah. He ended up in a cheap run-down motel by the airport, the kind of place where the carpets were stained and the air smelled of stale smoke and despair. For 2 days, he didn't leave the room. He just sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper, the full magnitude of his ruin crashing down on him. He had lost his money, his power, his reputation. But the loss that echoed loudest in the suffocating silence of the motel room was the loss of his humanity. He replayed that final conversation with Clara over and over in his mind. Her shocked, hurt face, the way he had called their child a complication, the cold, dismissive tone he had used to dismantle their life. He hadn't just been a ruthless businessman, he had been a cruel, empty shell of a man. Who had done this to him? He cycled through a list of enemies, Harrison Sterling rival hedge funds, disgruntled ex-employees. But none of it added up. The attack was too precise, too elegant. It wasn't a frontal assault. It was a quiet, systemic unraveling. It felt less like a corporate raid and more like a judgment. His assistant, David Hayes, was the only person who came to see him. He found Ethan sitting in the dark room and placed a bottle of water and a bag of food on the rickety table. "I'm sorry, Ethan," David said, his voice quiet. "Save your pity." Ethan rasped, his voice hoarse. "It's not a pity," David said. I think I know who was behind this. Or at least I have a theory." Ethan looked up, a flicker of interest in his dead eyes. "The day after you asked Clara to leave," David began tentatively, "I saw the returned wire transfer, the one for $500,000. It was refused by an account belonging to a Robert Thompson, your father-in-law. Her dad, the retired programmer." Ethan scoffed. "What about him?" "I was curious, so I did some digging. Not corporate espionage, just public records, old articles from the early days of the internet. Robert Thompson isn't just some programmer, Ethan. In the late 90s, he was known in certain circles as the architect. He designed the Loki protocol for secure transactions and the core logic for the Hyperion trading engine. Your entire company, my entire career. It's all built on the foundation of his work. He's a legend who chose to disappear." The pieces began to click into place in Ethan's shattered mind. the impossible-to-find flaw in his algorithm. The Whisper campaign is based on a deep, fundamental understanding of his systems. The attack wasn't random. It wasn't a rival. It was personal. It was precise. It was from the one man in the world he had never even considered a threat. The quiet father-in-law he had dismissed and disrespected. The man whose daughter he had broken. The realization was a physical blow. He wasn't outmaneuvered by a competitor. He was dismantled by a father protecting his child. It wasn't about money or power. It was about love and justice. All the things he had deemed liabilities. A wave of something akin to terror washed over him. He had picked a fight with a god of his own digital universe, and he had never even seen him. The sheer awesome power of Robert Thompson's quiet fury was terrifying. But beneath the terror was something else, a sliver of profound, gut-wrenching clarity. He deserved this. He had earned every moment of this agonizing downfall. He thought of Clara safe in her childhood home, protected by this quiet, brilliant giant of a man. He had thrown her out, believing he was casting her into the wilderness. In reality, he had sent her back to the safest fortress in the world. He looked at David. "Where is she?" David hesitated. "I'm not sure I should." "Please, David." Ethan's voice cracked, the arrogance finally completely gone. "I don't want to hurt her. I need to see her." David, seeing the genuine brokenness in his former boss's eyes, sighed. "She's not at her parents' house. Not primarily. I heard from a friend who knows her family that she's been volunteering. Something about helping people who are less fortunate. There's a community outreach center in the Beacon Hill neighborhood. The New Beginnings Center. She's there most days." Ethan nodded slowly. The irony was almost poetic. While he was losing his soulless empire, she was rebuilding her life by helping others. He knew what he had to do. It wasn't about getting his fortune back. It wasn't about asking for forgiveness, because he knew he didn't deserve it. It was about acknowledging the truth of what he had done to the person he had wronged most grievously. It was about facing the wreckage he had made not of his company, but of his own soul. He thanked David, took a long shower, and put on the last clean shirt he owned. For the first time in his life, Ethan Blackwood was going to face a consequence he couldn't buy his way out of. He was going to face his wife. The New Beginnings Community Center was a humble brick building a world away from the gleaming steel and glass towers Ethan had once inhabited. The sound of children playing echoed from a small yard, and the smell of soup drifted from an open window. It was a place of real, tangible human connection, everything his former life had lacked. He saw her through the window before he went in. Clara, now visibly pregnant, was sitting at a table patiently helping a young girl with her homework. She looked serene. There was a quiet strength in her face he had never seen before. The ordeal hadn't broken her. It had forged her. She was wearing a simple dress, her hair was tied back, and she was in that moment more beautiful than he had ever seen her in a designer gown. His heart pounded in his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide from the shame that was threatening to consume him. But he forced his feet to move, to push open the door and step inside. The warmth of the center was a stark contrast to the cold rain outside. A few people looked up as he entered his expensive, though now slightly disheveled suit, marking him as an outsider. Clara's head lifted, and her eyes met across the room. The laughter and chatter in the room seemed to fade away. For a moment she just stared at him. There was no hatred in her eyes, no anger, There was a deep, profound sadness, and something else, pity, that more than anything broke him. She excused herself from the table and walked toward him, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. She stopped a few feet away, creating a space between them that felt like a chasm. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm and even. "What are you doing here?" He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. All the clever speeches, the boardroom negotiations, the commanding orders, all of it was gone. He was left with nothing but the raw, ugly truth of who he was. So he did the only thing that felt right, the only thing that could possibly convey the depth of his shame and the totality of his defeat. In the middle of the crowded community center, Ethan Blackwood, the former titan of industry, sank to his knees. He bowed his head low, his forehead nearly touching the scuffed linoleum floor. It was not a gesture of supplication or a plea for forgiveness. It was an act of complete and total surrender, an acknowledgement of his monstrous crime against her and their child. A gasp went through the room. Clara stood silent, watching the man who had thrown her out, now kneeling at her feet. "Get up, Ethan," she said, softly, but her voice held a new authority. He slowly, painfully rose to his feet, his eyes fixed on the floor, unable to meet her gaze. "I didn't come here to ask you to forgive me, Clara," he said, his voice a raw whisper. "There are no words, no apologies that could ever be enough. I came here to tell you that I finally understand. Everything I thought was important, the money, the power, the empire, it was all dust. It was nothing. The only thing that ever had any real value in my entire life was you and our baby. And I threw it away. I am so sorry for the pain I caused you." He finally dared to look up at her. "Your father," he said with a ragged breath. "He is a great man. He gave me a lesson I desperately needed to learn." Clara listened, her expression unchanging. She had imagined this moment in her darkest hours, fantasized about screaming at him, about making him feel a fraction of the pain he had inflicted on her. But seeing him now, a hollowed-out, broken man, she felt no desire for revenge. She only felt a sad, quiet finality. "I accept your apology, Ethan," she said, and he felt a flicker of hope. But she continued, "I accept it, not for you, but for me, and for our child. We deserve to live without the weight of that hatred. But that doesn't mean there is a path back for us. You didn't just break my heart. You showed me who you truly are. I can't ever unsee that." She took a step back, reinforcing the distance between them. "I'm going to have this baby. I'm going to raise our son, and I'm going to teach him to be everything you are not: kind, compassionate, and a man of integrity. A man like his grandfather." The words were not delivered with malice, but with a simple, devastating clarity. "You can be a part of his life if you choose," she went on, "but not as my husband, not as the man who lives in my house. You can be his father, but you have to earn that title. You have to rebuild your life, not your fortune, but your character. You have to become a man that our son can one day look up to. That is your only way forward." With that, she turned and walked back to the little girl who was waiting for her, leaving Ethan standing alone in the center of the room. He watched her go, the finality of her words settling into his bones. It wasn't the ending he had wanted, but it was the one he deserved. There would be no magical reconciliation, no wiping the slate clean. There was only a long, arduous road ahead, a chance not to reclaim his lost glory, but to build a new life from the ashes, a life of meaning and perhaps one day redemption. He turned and walked out of the community center, back into the rain. He had lost his fortune overnight. He had bowed before the woman he had wronged, and in doing so, he had taken the first painful step on the bridge of humility, leaving the monster he had been behind, with a long and uncertain journey toward the man he hoped he could one day become. The story of Ethan Blackwood isn't just about a man losing his fortune. It's a powerful reminder that true wealth is not measured in stock prices or bank accounts. It's measured in integrity, in love, and in the promises we keep to the people who trust us. He had an empire at his fingertips, but was poorer than he could ever imagine. In the end, it took losing everything for him to find the slightest chance at gaining something real, a chance at redemption. Clara's journey shows us the incredible power of quiet strength and the unbreakable bond of family. It reminds us that you don't need an army to fight a monster. Sometimes all you need is a father's unwavering love and the courage to stand on your own. What would you have done in Clara's place? Do you believe a man like Ethan can truly change? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you and served as a powerful lesson, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Thank you for listening.
Millionaire promised the world to his mistress but forgot his pregnant wife's birthday. Meet Alexander Van Doren, a self-made millionaire, so used to getting everything he wants that he's forgotten how much it costs others. His life is a tapestry of luxurious galas, glittering diamonds, and secret rendezvous. But beneath the polished veneer, he's about to discover that a man who can buy the world might lose what truly matters most. Driven by obsession, he dares to promise the world to his radiant mistress, all while ignoring the quiet heartbreak of his pregnant wife. When a forgotten birthday sets off a chain of cataclysmic events, Alexander's world careens toward disaster. Secrets will unravel, loyalties will shatter, and no amount of money can save him now. Alexander Van Doren was, by all appearances, the perfect portrait of success. He was lean, tall, and strikingly handsome, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to pierce through whoever stood before him. His family name carried weight, but his true fortune was self-made, a sprawling real estate empire built upon a single risky investment he'd made at just 24 years old. By 30, he had multiplied that fortune 100-fold. Now, at 36, he was poised to double it yet again. He lived in the affluent enclave of Westbridge Hills, where gated mansions lined the streets like jewels in a crown. Neighbors spoke his name in hushed tones, a mix of envy and admiration. He had everything he wanted, or so it seemed. The truth was, in the silent corners of his life, dissatisfaction brewed like a storm. Alexander craved excitement, an addiction to adrenaline, and the thrill of conquering every obstacle. His wife, Catherine Van Doren, was the epitome of dignity and grace. Once an aspiring poet, she had traded her ambitions for the life of a corporate wife, attending charity events and nodding dutifully by her husband's side. Despite her own silent yearnings, Catherine held steadfastly to love and loyalty. She was 9 months pregnant with their first child, her belly a gentle curve that symbolized a long, cherished dream, but the glow that once marked her features had dimmed in recent months, replaced by worry lines carved from loneliness and suspicion. The tension in the mansion was palpable. Lately, Alexander had seemed preoccupied, spending many nights in his study or at business meetings. Catherine had begun to wonder, had she done something wrong? Was the pregnancy too much for him? Or perhaps there was someone else occupying that space in his heart. She tried to dismiss the thought, but women's intuition rarely lies dormant for long. Then came an innocent hint of reality that Catherine couldn't ignore. One night, while searching for her car keys, she found a receipt for an extremely expensive bracelet in Alexander's jacket pocket. Engraved on it was a message that read, "For my shining star, A.V." Now, Catherine's name had no V in it, and though the initials matched her husband, the note looked suspiciously intimate. Panic churned inside her, but she told herself it could be for business, perhaps a thank you gift for an investor or something along those lines. Yet the seed of doubt took root. In the days that followed, Catherine became more observant. She noticed Alexander's phone lighting up late at night with texts from someone named AP. She noticed the hush in his voice whenever he answered these calls. She felt the distance, colder than any winter frost, growing between them. But still, she tried to hope, to believe that once the baby arrived, everything would fall back into place. Little did she know that delicate facade of normalcy was on the brink of shattering, sending the Van Doren household into turmoil from which it might never recover. Anastasia Pierce was Alexander's secret, a secret that roared like a wildfire beneath the surface of his otherwise controlled existence. She was a striking woman with raven hair and emerald-green eyes that seemed to sparkle with mischievous curiosity. In many ways, she was the polar opposite of Catherine, yet she carried a certain allure that Alexander found irresistible. They'd met 6 months ago at a fundraising gala for the Westbridge Hills Arts Council, a place Alexander had attended more out of obligation than genuine interest. Yet upon spotting Anastasia across the room, her laughter echoing, her slender figure accentuated by a simple but elegant black dress, he'd felt a spark he could not ignore. Their first encounter was innocent enough. She'd merely introduced herself, praising his charitable contributions to local youth art programs. One drink led to another, and conversation flowed like a well-aged wine. Soon they were meeting under hushed arrangements at an upscale lounge downtown, away from the prying eyes of Westbridge Hills. They told themselves it was just a harmless flirtation, but lines blurred quickly. Anastasia was no naive college girl enamored by wealth. She was a sophisticated woman who had carved a path in the art world, curating exhibitions and traveling extensively. She was used to attention and men with money. Yet something about Alexander tugged at her heartstrings more intensely than she'd anticipated. Perhaps it was the subtle vulnerability lurking behind his confident exterior, or maybe it was his magnetic aura of possibility. He made lavish promises, whispered in her ear about a future filled with travel, romance, and a place of her own in his heart. She believed, or at least wanted to believe, that these promises were real. But as the months unfolded, Anastasia found herself catching glimpses of Alexander's deeper complexities, his restlessness, his unspoken burdens, and the ring that still glinted on his left hand whenever he forgot to take it off in her presence. She often wondered about Catherine, but Alexander's dismissals were always the same. "It's complicated. She doesn't understand me like you do," or "we're practically living separate lives now." He insisted a divorce was on the horizon, painting an image of a marriage that was more a business arrangement than a union of hearts. Stolen weekends in Montauk, secret lunches in hidden bistros, midnight phone calls brimming with passion. It was easy for Anastasia to lose herself in the fantasy. She craved the adrenaline too, thriving on the illicit thrill, but deep down, she yearned for stability. She wanted to be more than just a hidden mistress. She believed Alexander when he promised that soon it would just be the two of them. Now, with Catherine's pregnancy nearing its final weeks, the pressure mounted. Alexander was starting to show signs of agitation. He was jumpy, glancing at his phone every few minutes, always on alert. Anastasia felt the simmer of urgency in their conversations, as if a storm was about to break, yet she held fast to the illusions he'd spun around her. After all, he was Alexander Van Doren, the brilliant millionaire who had never failed in any venture. If anyone could make impossible dreams come true, it had to be him. What she didn't know was that behind the bravado, Alexander was dancing on thin ice, and every step threatened to plunge them all into the freezing darkness beneath. Back at the Van Doren mansion, the tension thickened with every passing day. Catherine's due date edged closer, and with it came a surge of emotional fragility. She found herself fending off swirling anxieties about motherhood, about her marriage, and about the unspeakable secret she feared might be unfolding before her very eyes. She tried to confront Alexander at dinner one night, choosing her words carefully, desperate for reassurance. "Alex," she began softly, tracing the rim of her glass of water, "I feel like we're drifting. Is something on your mind?" He looked up from his phone, seemingly startled. "What makes you say that?" "I've just been busy at work. You know how it is," he replied, offering the faintest of smiles. His eyes, however, revealed no warmth. Catherine pressed on, uncertain if she should mention the bracelet receipt or the mysterious late-night texts. But she stopped short, her heart hammered, fearing that speaking the words aloud would make them irrevocably real. She settled instead for a whispered question. "Don't you think we should spend more time together before the baby arrives? Maybe a short trip, just us?" Alexander grimaced slightly. The very thought of stepping away from his swirling entanglements, business deals, his affair, seemed like a burden. "We'll have time," he said tersely, returning his attention to his phone as if the conversation had already ended. That night, Catherine wept silently in bed while Alexander dozed off in his office, lulled by spreadsheets and clandestine messages from Anastasia. The future that once promised warmth and familial bliss was turning cold. If only Catherine had known how complicated things were behind the scenes. Days later, an ominous cloud settled over Westbridge Hills, literally and figuratively. A slow-moving storm churned in the Atlantic, threatening to drench the coastline in torrential rain. The local news couldn't stop warning about flash floods and hurricane-force winds. Yet the warnings did little to shift the course of the emotional storm taking shape within the Van Doren circle. For while Catherine was preparing for a baby, Anastasia was preparing to claim what she believed was rightfully hers. She'd grown restless with Alexander's excuses. Why did he refuse to make their relationship public? Why did he keep delaying the big talk about leaving Catherine? The frustration swelled into resentment, and resentment gave birth to bold decisions. Late one evening, she texted Alexander, "Anastasia, we need to talk, face to face. I want answers." But answers were not something Alexander was prepared to give just yet. His business deals were teetering on critical negotiations. A lucrative land development near Charleston was about to net him tens of millions. He needed to maintain focus, to keep his composure. He responded curtly, "Alexander, soon, my star. I promise. Just need to wrap up a few things." Anastasia read the message and felt a swirl of conflicting emotions, hope, anger, longing. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being strung along. Perhaps it was time to make Alexander see that she wasn't a mere accessory. Maybe she should make a bold appearance at the Van Doren mansion or confront him at his office. But would that risk losing him entirely? Fear and determination wrestled in her mind. Meanwhile, Catherine found herself alone in the mansion more often. She tried to distract herself by tidying the nursery, a serene space painted in soft green, with a crib made from the finest wood. but emptiness lingered in every corner of that grand house. She quietly decided that if Alexander wouldn't share his burdens with her, she'd uncover the truth on her own. Little did any of them realize that the approaching literal storm was merely a harbinger of the chaos and heartbreak that awaited. Catherine's birthday arrived on a day marked by incessant rainfall. Wind whipped the trees in the Van Doren estate's expansive garden, scattering leaves across the marble driveway. The storm had intensified overnight, and the weather mirrored Catherine's inner turmoil. She'd never been one to demand grand gestures or expensive gifts. A simple, heartfelt acknowledgement would have sufficed. In years past, Alexander would lavish her with roses, jewelry, or romantic dinners in five-star restaurants. They would dance, laugh, and talk about their shared dreams. Yet this year, as the sun struggled to break through the storm clouds, there was no sign of Alexander. Not even a text message. Catherine rose early, heart fluttering with a faint optimism. Perhaps he planned a surprise? She had to allow him that benefit of the doubt. She showered, dressed in a loose, comfortable sweater that stretched over her pregnant belly, and tiptoed downstairs. The house was silent, echoing her hopes back to her in empty hushes. By mid-morning, her phone remained quiet. No calls, no texts, just the relentless pounding of the rain on the windows. She sipped tea alone in the spacious living room, trying not to let her tears overflow. The day dragged on, each hour a cruel reminder that the man she loved was too lost in his own world to remember something as simple as her birthday. And where was Alexander? He was in an upscale penthouse suite downtown, far from the prying eyes of Westbridge Hills. A last-minute business conference call had turned into a celebratory lunch with potential investors, and that lunch turned into an impromptu dinner. Throughout it all, he was accompanied by Anastasia. She'd demanded a face-to-face meeting to discuss their future, and Alexander, hoping to placate her, invited her to the city under the guise of business. In the plush intimacy of that penthouse, they shared whispered confidences and sipped champagne. Anastasia prodded him about the timeline for his divorce, pressing harder than she ever had before. Her green eyes burned with resolve. "You keep saying you'll leave Catherine. You said you'd do it before the baby arrived, so we could start our life. But time's running out, Alexander." He swallowed hard, scanning the room as if searching for an exit. "Things are complicated, Anna." "You know that," he said, employing the gentle tone he used whenever he tried to calm her. "Once this business deal closes, I'll make the final move, I promise." Thunder rumbled in the distance, lightning splitting the sky. A flicker of guilt surfaced in Alexander's eyes, but he quickly suppressed it. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, but he ignored it. He was too ensnared by Anastasia's allure, too intoxicated by the escape she provided. He never once glanced at the date or realized its importance. Even as night fell, Catherine's phone remained silent of any birthday wishes from her husband. Alone in a darkened living room, the storm raging outside her windows, she made a promise to herself after the baby was born. She would confront Alexander directly. No more doubts or uncertainties. She wanted the truth, whether it shattered her heart or not. For Alexander, this single oversight for getting his pregnant wife's birthday would prove to be the first domino in a cascade of devastating consequences. The morning after Catherine's forgotten birthday, the storm had finally abated, but the atmosphere within the Van Doren mansion remained suffused with tension. Catherine woke up feeling numb. She hadn't slept well. Every time she closed her eyes, memories of happier birthdays flooded her consciousness. She remembered how Alexander once surprised her with a hot air balloon ride, how he serenaded her on a whim. Now, that seemed like another lifetime. She mustered the courage to confront him, but found the master bedroom empty. In his usual spot on the nightstand, Alexander's phone was missing. So was he. Instead, she found a terse note, had an early meeting. Don't wait up. The words stung like a slap to the face. Her birthday gone unacknowledged. She wondered if he even remembered now. By noon, Catherine decided she could no longer ignore her suspicions. She needed proof, solid evidence of Alexander's infidelity. Gathering her resolve, she went to his home office. It was a spacious room, lined with dark wooden shelves and encyclopedias of business strategies, with a large mahogany desk dominating the center. In that desk was a locked drawer she'd seen him open a few times, always discreetly. Her heart pounded as she rifled through his keys until she found the small one that fit. The drawer clicked open to reveal a stack of documents. Nestled among them was a small black journal with handwritten notes and receipts tucked into the pages. She flipped through quickly, eyes widening at what she saw, travel itineraries to luxury hotels. She had never stayed in with him. Designer shopping receipts for items far too intimate to be for business associates. And pictures. Selfies he'd taken with Anastasia in fancy restaurants, at art exhibits, and once on a yacht, each one capturing their secret world. Catherine's breath caught in her throat as she studied the woman in the photos. Anastasia was stunning everything Catherine had once been, perhaps. But it wasn't just jealousy that roiled in Catherine's gut. It was betrayal, heartbreak, and a fierce determination. She now had confirmation of her husband's double life. Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Footsteps in the hallway jolted her, and she hastily shoved everything back into the drawer, locking it. She could barely compose herself when Alexander walked in, a troubled expression on his face. "Kath, what are you doing in here?" he asked, noticing her tremor. She closed her eyes, took a shaky breath, and turned to face him. For a moment, neither spoke. Catherine was torn between accusing him outright and preserving the little dignity she had left. In the end, she said, "We need to talk," her voice steadied by an undercurrent of rage and heartbreak. Alexander looked uneasy. "Yes, we do, but maybe later. I have important calls." "Important calls?" she echoed, her voice edged with anger. "What about my birthday, Alexander? Or does that not matter anymore?" He seemed genuinely startled, a flash of realization crossing his face. "Catherine, I'm sorry. It slipped my mind with all the chaos at work. She held up a hand, cutting him off. Just don't. "We'll talk tonight," she said, her voice quivering with hurt, but also steeled by knowledge. With that, she brushed past him, leaving Alexander to grapple with the first stirrings of real guilt. What neither of them could predict was just how explosive that evening's conversation would be and how its repercussions would extend far beyond the walls of their mansion. Night descended on Westbridge Hills with a certain heaviness, as if the air itself braced for an impending confrontation. Catherine spent the day locked in a mental tug-of-war. Her heart wept for the marriage she once had, yet her mind screamed for answers, resolution, no matter how painful it might be. By the time Alexander returned home, she was waiting in the living room, perched on the edge of the couch like a sentinel. The room was awash in the dim glow of a single lamp, casting dramatic shadows on the walls. Catherine's expression was resolute, her posture poised. "We talk now," she said firmly the moment he stepped inside. Alexander set down his briefcase and loosened his tie, looking as though he'd rather be anywhere else. But there was no escaping. Not this time. Catherine wasted no time. She retrieved the stack of incriminating documents and photographs from the desk drawer, laying them out on the coffee table like evidence in a courtroom. "Do you want to explain these?" she asked, her voice heartbreakingly calm. Alexander froze, color draining from his face. He glanced at the images of him and Anastasia, the receipts, the notes scrawled in the little black journal. Lies dangled on the tip of his tongue, but he could no longer pretend. "Catherine, who is she?" Catherine's voice cracked, just enough to reveal her underlying pain. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. "Her name is Anastasia Pierce. We met some months ago." It was never supposed to go this far. Catherine's eyes glistened with tears she fought to hold back. But it did. And you chose her over your own wife, your pregnant wife. Why, Alexander? She waited, but no meaningful excuse came. Have you even considered the stress you're putting on me, on our child? Alexander pinched the bridge of his nose, shame mingling with frustration. Catherine, I'm sorry. My life. It felt like it was missing something. I couldn't control it. Everything just spiraled. Missing something, Catherine repeated, her voice choked with emotion. We built a life together, and I'm carrying your child. And you say you're missing something? He had no answer that would satisfy her. The room reverberated with silence until Catherine finally spoke again. You need to decide, Alexander. I'm not going to share you with anyone. If you want this marriage, if you want to be a father, you have to cut her out of your life. Completely. Alexander stared at the floor, weighed down by 1,000 unspoken fears. He thought of Anastasia's piercing green eyes, her effervescent laughter, the sense of forbidden freedom she awakened in him. But he also thought of Catherine's steady heart, her unwavering love, and the unborn child he had a duty to protect. The decision was monstrous, yet also straightforward. Family or mistress? I need time, he whispered finally, afraid to look Catherine in the eye. You have until tomorrow, she said, not unkindly. Otherwise, I'll do what I have to do for myself and for this baby. Alexander nodded, the gravity of her words crashing over him. He turned away, unable to face the devastation etched on her features. As he climbed the grand staircase to their bedroom, he felt as though each step carried him closer to a decision that would reshape his life forever. But fate, as it often does, had other, more dramatic plans in store. Anastasia Pierce had reached her breaking point. The night before, she and Alexander had exchanged tense text messages. His vague reassurances did little to calm her growing apprehension. A new fear clutched at her heart. What if Alexander never truly intended to leave Catherine? What if all his promises were just a mirage, dangling before her to keep her interested while he juggled a double life? In a moment of reckless determination, Anastasia decided to force Alexander's hand. She dressed in a tailored navy trench coat, stepping out into the drizzly morning air, and hailed a taxi to Westbridge Hills. The journey felt eternal. Nervous energy sparked in her chest as the suburban scenery glided by a realm of manicured lawns and million-dollar estates. So quiet, it was almost unnerving. She clutched her phone, ignoring a series of missed calls from Alexander. Let him worry, she thought grimly. Arriving at the Van Doren mansion, she stepped out onto the gravel driveway, her heels crunching ominously. The mansion loomed before her, a testament to the wealth and power that Alexander commanded. If he truly wanted a life with her, he had to be honest. She squared her shoulders and marched to the front door, ringing the bell with a steely determination. It was Catherine who opened it. The two women locked eyes for a moment. Catherine, heavily pregnant, was taken aback by the visitor's striking beauty and unwavering stare. Recognition dawned on her face. She'd seen that face in the photos. Instantly, her heart pounded like a war drum. Anastasia Pierce, the woman, introduced herself, barely managing the politeness to offer a tight, thin-lipped smile. I'm here to see Alexander. Catherine inhaled a trembling breath. So this was the woman who had disrupted her life. Anger roiled beneath her outward composure. Alexander isn't home, Catherine said icily, stepping aside to block any attempt of entry. Then I'll wait, Anastasia replied, her voice resolute. She took a daring step forward, as if challenging Catherine to stop her. The tension in the foyer was suffocating. Catherine's fists clenched involuntarily. You have no right to be here, she hissed. You've already caused enough harm. Anastasia met her gaze, anger flaring in her emerald eyes. Listen, Catherine, she said, her tone unyielding. I know this is painful, but I'm not the only one responsible. Alexander led me on. He promised me. Catherine cut her off, voice quavering with a mix of rage and despair. Promised you what? A life together? A future? And what about my future? Our child's future? In that moment, both women realized how intricately their fates had become entwined by one man's lies. The confrontation escalated into a chaotic exchange of accusations and heartbreak, culminating in a stark ultimatum from Anastasia: if Alexander doesn't choose me, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man he really is. Before Catherine could respond, headlights swept over the driveway as Alexander's car pulled in. He stepped out, shock painted all over his face at the sight of the two women. His mistress and his wife both pregnant, with questions, accusations, demands stood mere feet apart, and he was the linchpin in this entire, spiraling disaster. Little did Alexander realize the damage was already done, and that destiny had yet another cruel twist waiting around the corner. The wind picked up again as storm clouds gathered above Westbridge Hills, painting the sky a deep grey. Alexander hurried to the front steps, his heart pounding from the moment he recognized Anastasia's sleek figure standing face to face with Catherine. "Alexander," Anastasia said stiffly, hands balled at her sides. Her eyes flicked to Catherine's pregnant belly, then back to him. "We need to talk." "Inside," Catherine added, her voice cold. "Now." Alexander could scarcely breathe under the weight of their combined fury. He led them to the living room, a space usually reserved for elegant gatherings and polite conversation. Today, it felt like the stage for a tragic showdown. The air crackled with tension as they stood in a triangle, Catherine by the grand piano, Anastasia near the fireplace, and Alexander between them, his expression etched with desperation. He turned to Anastasia first. "What are you doing here? This is my home. You can't just—" She cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't you dare scold me. You've been avoiding me, dodging my questions. You promised me a life, a future. I deserve an explanation." Catherine's gaze was laser-focused on Alexander. "So it's true. She came to stake her claim in our home, Alexander." Her voice trembled with unmasked hurt. "Did you even think about what this would do to me? To your child?" Alexander's head swiveled from one to the other, panic shining in his eyes. "Catherine, Anastasia, this got out of control. I never wanted to hurt either of you. Yet here we are." Anastasia fired back. "Stop pretending you're some helpless bystander. You orchestrated this. You promised me a fresh start, and now you're looking at me like I'm a stranger." Silence smothered the room. Catherine found her breath uneven, anxiety pressing down on her like a vise. She spoke slowly, trying to maintain composure. "You told me last night you needed time. Well, time's up. Choose now, Alexander. Tell her to leave and cut ties for good, or we're done." The ultimatum hung in the air, a loaded gun aimed at the fragile life he'd built. Alexander looked at Anastasia, whose jaw was set in defiance. Then he turned to Catherine, her eyes dark with betrayal, one hand protectively resting on her belly. A swirl of images raced through his mind. The vow he'd taken with Catherine, the child that was mere weeks away from coming into the world, the nights of stolen passion with Anastasia, the promises he'd made in whispered hushes. His throat felt dry as desert sand. He paused, swallowed. "I choose Catherine. This is my family. I can't abandon my wife and our baby." Anastasia recoiled as though slapped. "You're making a mistake," she said, voice shaking. "You told me you were unhappy, that you wanted out." Alexander closed his eyes. Maybe I said things in the heat of the moment, but it's over. We're done, Anastasia." Tears welled in Anastasia's eyes. Part of her had expected this answer, but hearing it aloud shattered her illusions. She shot Catherine a look that was equal parts fury and sorrow. "You think you've won?" she said in a voice strangled by heartbreak. "He'll do it again. Men like Alexander never change." With that, she spun on her heel and headed for the door, leaving Alexander and Catherine in the hush of aftermath. But even as the door slammed shut, Catherine could not find relief. Instead, a deep, unsettling dread settled in her chest. Something in Anastasia's parting words, in her aura of steely resolve, warned that this was far from over. In the days that followed, Alexander tried to make amends, but Catherine's trust had been severely eroded. She went through the motions, allowing him to accompany her to doctor appointments, letting him place a comforting hand on her shoulder, but he could sense the emotional chasm that now divided them. The staff at the mansion tried to maintain a veneer of normalcy, but whispers circulated. Servants exchanged nervous glances. The air felt fraught with unspoken truths and dangerous secrets. For Alexander, guilt was a relentless spectre. He took extended leaves from his work, passing off responsibilities to his junior partners so he could focus on repairing his marriage. But whenever Catherine caught him texting on his phone, her face would darken, consumed by the bitter memory of his betrayal. Sensing her suspicion, Alexander tried to distance himself from anything that might link him back to Anastasia. He blocked her number, deleted their photos, and tried to bury every trace of her existence. But forgetting is often easier said than done. Meanwhile, Anastasia seethed in her small condo across town, nursing the wounds of rejection. She ruminated over every promise Alexander had made, every glance, every caress. Had it all been a lie? Or had Catherine's pregnancy forced him into a corner he couldn't escape? Yet she refused to accept that her relationship with Alexander was truly finished. She told herself that men like him rarely stayed in the straight and narrow for long. All she needed was a moment, a single slip-up, to wedge herself back into his life, or at least to exact some measure of revenge for the heartbreak. On a particularly sleepless night, she scrolled through her phone, pausing at a saved voicemail from Alexander, left weeks ago. His voice was low, seductive, sweet as honey. "You're my shining star, Anna. I can't wait to build the life we've been dreaming about." She replayed it several times, tears of rage blurring her vision. Finally, with trembling fingers, she forwarded the voicemail to Catherine's email address, found on the Van Doren Foundation's official website. No note, no explanation, just raw evidence of Alexander's duplicity. Let Catherine decide how to interpret it. When Catherine woke the next morning, she found the voicemail in her inbox. Listening to it felt like ripping open barely healed wounds. She stared at her phone in disbelief, the numbness giving way to anger. Alexander was still asleep beside her, oblivious to her discovery. She wanted to wake him, to scream, to demand why he had ever said those words. But she fought the urge. Instead, she slipped out of bed and walked to the nursery. The pastel walls, the mobile gently spinning over the crib, all reminded her of what was at stake, her baby's future. Sighing, she sank into the rocking chair, the phone screen casting a pale glow in the dim morning light. She was tired physically, emotionally, spiritually, tired of feeling powerless. A plan began to form in her mind. If Alexander had indeed ended things, then Anastasia's meddling might be an act of desperation. But if he was lying, Catherine intended to find out. No more half measures. She was determined to lay this entire mess bare, consequences be damned. A new storm system rolled over the coast, lightning slicing the sky in eerie flashes. The thunder echoed like a premonition of chaos yet to come. Catherine decided she couldn't wait any longer. She approached Alexander in his study, face solemn, heart pounding. "We need to talk," she said, her voice devoid of the softness he once loved. The man across from her looked fatigued, but she showed little sympathy. He nodded, shutting his laptop. "What is it, Kath?" She held up her phone, her gaze cold. "Anastasia forwarded me a voicemail. From you." Alexander's face tightened, a flicker of panic in his eyes. "Catherine, that's old. Before I Before I decided to fix things with you, I swear. Then why is she sending it now? Catherine demanded, forcing her rising anger down. Are you still in contact? No, he said firmly. I told you. I ended it. She won't leave me alone. She's upset. Catherine wanted to believe him. But trust had become a fragile concept in her life. I'm giving you one chance to prove you're telling the truth, she said. Meet with Anastasia face to face. Make it clear, once and for all, that she has no place in our lives. That might be the only way she'll stop harassing us. Alexander swallowed hard. He imagined Anastasia's pleading eyes, the swirl of unspoken sorrow between them. But Catherine was right. There was no other way to end this cleanly. Fine, he said, his voice tinged with resignation. I'll do it. On one condition, you come with me. Let there be no confusion. Catherine paused. The idea of confronting her husband's mistress again filled her with dread, but perhaps this was the closure they needed. All right, she agreed quietly. We'll do it together. That evening, a meeting was arranged at a neutral location, a private lounge in a boutique hotel. Downtown, quiet enough for discreet conversation. Rain hammered against the windows as the trio converged. Anastasia arrived first, nursing a glass of wine at a corner table. Catherine and Alexander appeared moments later, side by side but maintaining a formal distance. Alexander wasted no time. Anna, he said tightly, this needs to end. We're done. I'm choosing my family. Anastasia's eyes flickered with wounded pride. She made a visible effort to remain composed, though her voice quivered. Are you sure, Alex? After everything we shared? Catherine stiffened, her arms crossed. He's sure, she cut in, refusing to be intimidated. We both are. The lounge was nearly empty, their voices resonating with a tense intimacy. Anastasia inhaled sharply, as if grappling with her next words. Fine, she said, forcing a shrug. But I didn't come here to beg. I came to warn you. If you think I'm going to disappear quietly, you're mistaken. Lightning illuminated the windows, revealing streaks of rain that smeared the night sky. Catherine's heart hammered. What are you talking about? Anastasia leaned forward, her green eyes narrowing. Alexander promised me more than just sweet words. He made business deals in my name, gave me insider information. It's all documented, Catherine. I could ruin him or your precious Van Doren name if I wanted to. Alexander paled. Anna, you wouldn't, he whispered, realizing the depth of the betrayal he'd enabled. A bitter smile tugged at Anastasia's lips. Don't corner a wounded animal, darling. You never know how vicious it might become. The flash of lightning outside was blinding, followed by a crack of thunder so loud it rattled the chandelier overhead. In that moment, all pretense of civility shattered, and Catherine realized that the storms raging within their lives were far from over. The next morning brought a jarring sense of urgency. Catherine woke early, anxiety dancing across her heart. She paced the corridors of the Van Doren mansion, imagining the headlines if Anastasia unleashed her secrets. Alexander's shady dealings might become a public spectacle, and their child would be born into a maelstrom of scandal. She recalled every charity event, every press conference, every philanthropic project that bore the Van Doren name. Reputations could be destroyed in a single headline, but her concerns went beyond image. She feared for Alexander's mental state. Though she resented him for his betrayal, she also recognized that his world had been built on high stakes and risk-taking. If everything came crashing down, would he survive the fall? Meanwhile, Alexander was consumed with damage control. He made frantic calls to his attorneys, his business associates, even calling in favors from local politicians. All the while, he refused to look Catherine in the eye, as if the shame of his affair and the fear of public ruin were more than he could bear. Just when Catherine thought she'd seen the worst, a stern knock sounded at the mansion's front door. A courier arrived with a sealed envelope addressed to Alexander. Inside, They found copies of files implicating him in insider trading and shady property acquisitions documents that bore Anastasia's name in key places. A handwritten note in flamboyant cursive was included. "Decide how this ends, AP." Alexander sank into a leather armchair, burying his face in his hands. "She's not bluffing," he whispered, voice trembling. "I gave her access to some deals. She knows everything." Catherine's mind whirled. She felt a rush of anger, betrayal, and dread. "Why, Alex? Why risk everything we've built?" He looked up at her, hollow-eyed. "Because I thought I was invincible, unstoppable. I got caught up in the thrill of it all. Now it's over." Catherine inhaled sharply, feeling a wave of dizziness. She pressed a hand to her belly, steadying herself. The baby was due any day now, and she realized she needed to protect herself and their child. "We can't let her blackmail us," she said resolutely. "We have to go to the authorities or fight this head-on, or—" The conversation was interrupted by her sudden gasp. A sharp pain rippled through her abdomen, and she doubled over. Alexander rushed to her side, eyes flaring in alarm. "What's wrong? My water broke," Catherine managed between labored breaths. "It's time." Panic surged through Alexander. Everything else, Anastasia, the documents, the scandal, became secondary. He scooped Catherine into his arms, shouting for the driver to bring the car around. Within minutes, they were racing to the hospital, the tension of the mansion left behind, replaced by a new fear that Catherine and the baby might face complications. Yet even as they sped through the rain-slicked streets, one thought pulsed in Catherine's mind. Anastasia's threat still loomed, and nothing, not even the miracle of birth, could fully eclipse the darkness that had infiltrated their lives. She clung to Alexander's hand, uncertain whether this child's birth would bring them together or tear them apart once and for all. The drive to Westbridge Hills Medical Center felt like a fever dream for Catherine. Every bump in the road sent a jolt of pain through her abdomen, and the contractions were coming fast, each wave sharper than the last. Alexander gripped the steering wheel with knuckles turned white, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Their previous worries, Anastasia's blackmail, the precarious business deals, receded in the urgency of impending parenthood. Upon arrival, nurses quickly wheeled Catherine into a private labor suite, and Alexander followed close behind. Alarms beeped softly in the background, the fluorescent lights lending the corridor a harsh brightness that only amplified Catherine's vulnerability. A flurry of medical staff attended her, checking vitals, hooking her up to monitors that tracked the baby's heartbeat. The rhythm was strong, steady, a reassuring sign that even amid this chaos, new life persisted. Alexander hovered at the bedside, stroking Catherine's hair as she breathed through the contractions. Tears shimmered in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, so quietly that she almost didn't hear. "I'm sorry for everything." Catherine looked into his face, searching for sincerity. Despite the pain, she managed a nod, acknowledging at least the sincerity of the moment, if not full forgiveness just yet. "Let's get through this first," she murmured, her voice tight with discomfort. And so began the longest hours of their lives. Each contraction felt like a crescendo, Catherine's breathing ragged as she tried to focus on the coaching from the obstetrician. Alexander offered her ice chips, whispered encouragement, and rubbed her back. In those moments, the memory of Anastasia and the documents receded, replaced by an all-consuming devotion to bringing their child into the world safely. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the doctor announced it was time for Catherine to push. She summoned every ounce of strength in her body, the pressure building to an almost unbearable peak. Lightning flashed outside the hospital windows, thunder rolling in a dramatic underscore to the miracle and madness of the evening. Alexander held her hand, pressing his forehead against hers, tears running down both their cheeks. One final push, and the room filled with the piercing cry of a newborn. Catherine collapsed back against the pillows, gasping. The world slowed as a nurse carefully wrapped the tiny, squirming infant in a soft blanket, then placed the baby in Catherine's arms. "It's a girl," the nurse announced, smiling warmly. The baby's cries softened as she felt her mother's warmth and her father's trembling hand gently stroking her cheek. In that moment, Catherine and Alexander locked eyes. A silent understanding passed between them, a recognition that, despite the betrayals and lies, they had created something precious. For the first time in months, hope flickered in Catherine's chest, even if it was fragile and overshadowed by the storms awaiting them outside the hospital walls. For a brief time, the world paused. Friends and family, those who hadn't already distanced themselves, sent congratulations. Nurses praised the baby's health. The newborn slept peacefully in a bassinet beside Catherine's bed, and Alexander found himself watching in awe, as if seeing true beauty for the first time. But reality waited, patient and unrelenting. On the second day of Catherine's hospital stay, Alexander stepped out to take a call from his lawyer. It was confirmed. Anastasia had indeed sent copies of incriminating documents to various media outlets, all set to publish unless Alexander met her demands. She wanted a substantial sum of money, enough to set her up for life, and a public apology that admitted no wrongdoing on her part but tarnished his own credibility. Alexander felt the walls closing in. He could pay her off, but it wouldn't end the speculation or the rumors. Worse, it would deplete his liquidity at a critical moment, possibly sabotaging the Charleston development deal. On the other hand, if he refused, he risked being charged with insider trading, an offense that could ruin him financially and legally. His mind reeled as he stared at the sterile hospital corridor, where the faint smell of antiseptic mingled with his own cold sweat. Returning to Catherine's side, he found her resting, the baby swaddled in her arms. He hesitated, torn between burdening her and wanting to share the weight. Guilt gnawed at him. Eventually, he told her everything. Catherine's first reaction was shock, followed swiftly by anger. But as she looked down at her sleeping daughter, a fierce, protective instinct overshadowed all else. "We can't let her destroy this family," she said firmly. "You need to fight back, but do it the right way." Alexander nodded, tears threatening to betray his composure. "I don't know how," he admitted. "The law is on her side if she has proof." Catherine set her jaw. "Then we need to find proof that she manipulated you too. Something that shows she isn't an innocent victim. Doesn't she have any skeletons in her closet?" A spark of possibility flickered in Alexander's eyes. Anastasia had once boasted about bending rules in her art curation business, forging documents to smuggle rare artifacts. Could that be leveraged? He wasn't sure. Still, the notion of exposing Anastasia's wrongdoing carried its own risks and moral dilemmas. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Alexander reached out to an old acquaintance, Daniel Remington, a tech-savvy investor who owed him a favor from their early days in real estate. Daniel was known for keeping hush-hush about grey area tasks, often skirting legal lines to get what he needed. Alexander felt a wave of distaste for resorting to such alliances, but the alternative was ruin. They met in a dimly lit parking garage beneath a high-rise downtown, reminiscent of a scene from a spy thriller. Rain dripped from overhead pipes, creating puddles that reflected the fluorescent glow of flickering lights. "You've really stepped in it this time, haven't you, Van Doren?" Daniel said, leaning against a concrete pillar, arms folded. Alexander exhaled heavily. "I need to protect my family, Dan. I messed up. Help me fix it." With a wry smile, Daniel nodded. "I'll do what I can. Get me her phone number, any email addresses, social media handles, anything. I'll see if there's something we can use to negotiate." Alexander handed over a small piece of paper with Anastasia's details. "Whatever you find, keep it quiet. I don't want to push her into a corner so badly that she lashes out. She's capable of anything right now. Daniel's eyes gleamed, understood. Back at the mansion, Catherine sat in the nursery, feeding their daughter, whom they had named Elizabeth Grace Van Doren. The baby was a marvel, a tiny bundle of innocence and potential. Every coo and yawn tugged at Catherine's heart, reminding her of the life she wanted to protect, a life free from the shadow of scandal and betrayal. Alexander paced the hallway, phone in hand, awaiting Daniel's call. Eventually, it came. Daniel's voice crackled through the line. "I've found something." Anastasia had some questionable dealings with a private collector overseas. There might be grounds for accusing her of fraud or smuggling. The details are fuzzy, but the mere threat of exposing this might make her back off. Relief coursed through Alexander, though it was tainted by the bitterness of how low he was willing to sink. "All right, draft a statement. Send it to her. Make it clear that if she releases anything about me, I'll release what you found about her. Let's see if she calls our bluff." An uneasy truce settled over the Van Doren household as they waited for Anastasia's response. Days dragged on without any new media reports or blackmail messages. Catherine clung to hope, her focus shifting to Elizabeth's well-being. She began to imagine a future, maybe a smaller house, a calmer life. She'd even considered renting an apartment somewhere far away if the scandal erupted, determined to shield Elizabeth from the fallout. One afternoon, Catherine was in the living room, rocking Elizabeth in her arms while Alexander scrolled nervously through emails. Suddenly his phone buzzed. A message from Anastasia flashed across the screen. "You think you've outsmarted me? I'm not giving up that easily. Let's negotiate." Alexander glanced at Catherine. She nodded, silently urging him to handle the situation carefully. Responding promptly, Alexander typed, "We both have damaging information. Let's end this without mutual destruction. What do you want?" A minute passed, felt like an eternity before Anastasia's next message arrived. A sum of money. Enough to cover damages and lost opportunities. "Once I have it, I disappear. No more threats." Bile rose in Alexander's throat. He typed through gritted teeth, "Where and when?" She shot back a location, a chic cafe in the city, and a time, tomorrow afternoon. Alexander's mind churned. Meeting in public reduced the risk of confrontation, but it also meant there'd be watchful eyes. He'd have to be cautious. Catherine insisted on coming along, but Alexander shook his head. "We can't risk that. If we push her too hard, she might become vindictive again." Reluctantly, Catherine agreed, but she insisted on a safeguard. Alexander would wear a small recording device, courtesy of Daniel's connections, to capture any incriminating admissions. If Anastasia tried to renege or twist the agreement, they'd have tangible evidence to protect themselves. The next day arrived, overcast and drizzling. Alexander parked a few blocks from the cafe, briefcase in hand. Inside the case was a fraction of the money Anastasia demanded, with a promise of the rest to be wired to an account once she confirmed the destruction of all incriminating documents. Daniel lurked in a nearby car, ready to call the police if things went sideways. Alexander's heart hammered as he stepped inside. Anastasia was seated in a corner booth, wearing large sunglasses despite the grey day. She signaled him over, her smile a precarious blend of regret and defiance. "Busy day?" she asked, voice dripping with irony. Alexander ignored the small talk and placed the briefcase on the table. "Here's your partial payment. You'll get the rest when I have proof you've deleted every file and retracted every statement." Anastasia removed her sunglasses, revealing reddened eyes that hinted at sleepless nights. "You really believe I wanted it to come to this, Alexander? I loved you." A pang of something, guilt, pity, flickered across his face. "We both made mistakes, but you went too far, Anna. Blackmail isn't love. She sighed, tears threatening but never quite falling. I just wanted the life you promised. Everything else was me lashing out. He slid a small flash drive across the table. This contains evidence of your dealings abroad. Let this serve as a reminder not to cross me again. Her gaze hardened, and for a moment Alexander wondered if she might cause a scene. Instead, she took the flash drive, exhaling sharply. Fine, I'll wipe the files, retract my leaks. But if you ever breathe a word about my dealings, I'll have my own backup plan. Do we understand each other? Alexander nodded. The tension between them was suffocating, heavy with the ghosts of what might have been. With trembling hands, Anastasia unzipped the briefcase, checking the cash. Then she stood up, smoothing her coat. You win, Alex. But trust me, life doesn't always hand out second chances. Whatever problems you had in your marriage, fix them, or you'll end up right back here. She brushed past him, leaving a faint trace of perfume in her wake. Outside, the drizzle had intensified into a steady rain. Alexander watched her disappear into the grey cityscape, a swirl of emotions too tangled to name. Part of him felt relief, another part sadness, and yet another part an unshakable sense of foreboding. Had he truly shut the door on this chapter, or had he merely postponed a worse disaster? Back in Westbridge Hills, Catherine waited anxiously by the fireplace, Elizabeth asleep in her nursery. When Alexander finally returned, drenched from the rain, she saw the exhaustion etched in every line on his face. Without speaking, he sank onto the sofa beside her. The crackling fire cast flickering shadows on the walls, as if echoing the turbulent shadows that still haunted them. It's done, he said quietly. She'll back off. Catherine searched his face for reassurance. And the evidence? She'll destroy it? He nodded, though not entirely convincingly. That's what she agreed to. Reaching out, he took her hand, his voice trembling slightly. Catherine, I know I've hurt you deeply. I know sorry doesn't fix everything, but I want to try. For Elizabeth, for us. I promise you, I'm finished with lies. She studied him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting both the pain of betrayal and the flicker of renewed hope. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady. Then we'll try. We'll go to therapy, rebuild trust one day at a time. But I won't ever go back to how things were, Alexander. Our daughter deserves better than that. He nodded fervently. She does. We all do. In the weeks that followed, life took on a new texture, cautious, subdued, but not without glimmers of promise. The public scandal never materialized. The media moved on to the next sensation, and Alexander's lawyers quietly settled any lingering legal concerns behind closed doors. The Charleston deal pulled through, albeit at a tighter margin, and Alexander scaled back his ambitions. Realizing he could no longer juggle illusions and deception with the role of husband and father, Catherine found solace in motherhood, bonding with Elizabeth in the nursery she had lovingly designed. She began writing poetry again, using her pen as a means to process the swirl of emotions. Piece by piece, the Van Doren mansion shifted from a battleground of secrets into a haven where forgiveness might just take root. They often reflected on the darkest hours, the forgotten birthday that set everything in motion, the confrontation with Anastasia at the mansion, the heartbreak that almost tore them apart. Yet through sheer tenacity and a baby's gentle laughter, they found the resolve to keep moving forward. A fragile peace had settled over their lives, but they knew it would take endless care to maintain. For Catherine, each dawn was a chance to decide anew whether to trust Alexander, to trust herself, and to trust in the future of their family. For Alexander, every kiss he placed on Elizabeth's forehead reminded him of the responsibility he bore, the vow he'd nearly broken beyond repair. Let's make this work, Catherine would say, gazing at their daughter curled in her crib. Yes, Alexander would echo, voice hushed with humility. Let's make it work. And in that quiet promise, day by day, they chose each other, determined to cling to the precious gift of life that bound them together even after almost losing it all. And so ends the turbulent tale of Alexander and Catherine Van Doren, a cautionary reminder that even the wealthy cannot buy freedom from the consequences of betrayal. In the wake of heartbreak and near disaster, they stand at a crossroads where forgiveness is an everyday choice, and trust is rebuilt brick by painstaking brick. Anastasia's legacy haunts them still, a reminder of how quickly desire and deceit can unravel a life of apparent perfection. Yet in the fragile laughter of a newborn baby, Alexander and Catherine have found a reason to hope, a testament to the power of second chances. If you've been riveted by this real-life drama, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that peel back the layers of human desire, ambition, and redemption. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe a marriage can truly be saved after such betrayal? Let's keep the conversation going.